On the night of April 1st, 1984, Marvin Gaye called Lionel Richie. They talked about music. They talked about life. They talked about whether what they had made would last. And before he hung up, Marvin said 4 words: "I love you, brother." Lionel said it back. The next day, Marvin Gaye was dead, and Lionel has never stopped thinking about that phone call. Marvin Gaye had been one of the most significant voices in American popular music since the early 1960s, since the specific moment when his voice, combined with the Motown machine and the particular genius of the people around him, had produced a series of recordings that defined what soul music was and what it could aspire to be. He had given the world Ain't No Mountain High Enough, and I Heard It Through the Grapevine, and Let's Get It On, and Sexual Healing. He had given the world What's Going On, the album that had changed the conversation about what popular music was allowed to address, that had brought the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement and the specific grief of a country at war with itself into the recording studio, and produced something that was simultaneously a political statement and a piece of music so beautiful that the politics and the beauty were inseparable from each other. He had given the world his voice, the specific instrument that could move between tenderness and anguish in the space of a single phrase, that carried inside it the full range of what it meant to be alive and to feel things and to make art from the feeling. He had also, by April of 1984, given the world a great deal of his difficulty. The years between the peak of his commercial success and the night of April 1st had not been easy years, had been years of financial crisis and substance struggle, and the specific deterioration that follows when a person of extraordinary sensitivity has been in an industry designed to extract from that sensitivity the maximum commercial value without providing adequate support for the extraction costs. He had been through a divorce that had produced some of his most moving music and some of his most significant personal pain. He had been through tax problems and legal difficulties and the kind of accumulated professional and personal crisis that can follow a person who has burned very brightly for a very long time through spaces that were not designed to accommodate the specific heat of their burning. He had returned to Los Angeles in 1983, had returned to his family home, to the house in the Crenshaw district where his parents lived, seeking something that the years of touring and recording and the peripatetic existence of a major artist had not provided. He was 44 years old. He was, by the accounts of the people around him, in a state of significant internal difficulty, wrestling with things that his music had always been able to say out loud and that his private life was less able to navigate. He was, by those same accounts, sometimes the Marvin Gaye of the recordings and sometimes someone else, someone rawer and less managed and less certain of the things that the music had always seemed certain about. Lionel Richie had known Marvin Gaye since the Motown years, since the specific geography of the music industry in which the significant figures of black popular music occupied overlapping spaces and encountered each other with the regularity of people who share a professional world and understand, each from their own position, something about what the other is doing and why it matters. They were not the closest of friends, their specific orbits, while adjacent, were not identical, and the demands of their respective careers had not produced the daily proximity that generates deep familiarity. But they had the specific quality of relationship that exists between people who respect each other's work so thoroughly that the respect itself becomes a form of intimacy, who understand, each from their own position, what the other has achieved and what it has cost and what it represents in the larger story of what their shared tradition was and was becoming. The phone rang on the evening of April 1st. Lionel answered. The voice on the other end was Marvin's, unmistakable even in the informal register of a personal call rather than a recording, the specific quality of a voice that has been trained and used and refined over decades of professional use while still retaining the particular character that makes it immediately recognizable as this voice rather than any other voice. The call did not begin with anything in particular.
That was, in its own way, the first sign of something, the absence of the specific purpose that most calls begin with, the agenda or the question or the update that gives a call its reason for existing. Marvin was calling the way people call when the reason for calling is simply the calling itself, when the need is for conversation rather than communication, for the specific warmth of another person's voice in the particular way that warmth becomes necessary, when the world has been quiet and dark for long enough that silence starts to feel like the only available condition. They talked about music, about the state of it, about what was happening in 1984, about the synthesizers and the drum machines and the production styles that were reshaping what popular music sounded like and what it was trying to do. Marvin had opinions about all of it, delivered in the specific way that people with deep knowledge deliver opinions, not as performances of expertise, but as genuine assessments, the conclusions of someone who has been paying attention for a long time and has arrived at views that the paying attention has earned. He talked about what he was working on, about the music he was still hearing in his head that had not yet found its way to tape, about the specific frustration of having more ideas than time and more time than peace. He asked Lionel about Hello. The song had been out for several months, had climbed the charts with the patient certainty of something that knows where it is going, had reached #1 and stayed, had begun to acquire the specific quality of songs that are going to outlast their moment and become part of the permanent furniture of the culture, rather than simply a successful record from a particular year. Marvin had heard it. He said, "That song is going to live." He said it with the directness of someone who has spent enough time making music to know the difference between a song that is good and a song that is going to live, and who does not make the distinction casually. He said, "That song is what you needed to make. Whatever comes before or after, that song is the thing."
I wasn't sure about it. I almost didn't finish it. I know. You can hear that in it. You can hear that it almost didn't exist. That's part of what makes it what it is, the specific quality of something that was almost withheld. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The best things always almost didn't happen. The best things always cost something to make exist. If it comes easy, it's not the best thing." Then Marvin said something that shifted the register of the conversation, moved it from the professional discussion of music to something more personal, something that carried a different weight. He said, "Do you ever think about whether what you made will last? Not the commercial stuff, not the charts. Whether the actual thing, the music, the feeling in it, whether that will still be there when you're gone?" Lionel said, "Yes." He said it without hesitation, because it was true, because it was the question that everyone who makes things lives with, and that most of them never ask out loud. Marvin said, "I think about it a lot lately." He said it in the specific tone of someone who has been thinking about it more than lately, who has been thinking about it in the way you think about things when they feel urgent rather than merely interesting. Lionel said, "What's going on will last forever." He said this with the complete certainty of someone who has no doubt about what they are saying, who is not offering comfort, but reporting a fact that the evidence of 20 years of listening to the album had made irrefutable. He said, "That album is not going anywhere. That album is in the category of things that cannot be lost because too many people have been changed by them." Marvin was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I needed to hear you say that. Not because I didn't know it, but because I needed to hear someone else say it out loud." They talked for a while longer, about the people they both knew, about the industry, about Los Angeles, and the specific quality of the city in 1984, the sprawling, sunlit, perpetually optimistic city that both of them had spent significant portions of their careers in, that had shaped them in ways they could not always articulate, and that continued to be the backdrop against which the music was made. The conversation had the specific quality of conversations that happen when two people who respect each other have no particular agenda,
that move through subjects the way rivers move through landscapes, following the natural course of what is interesting and pausing where the pausing is worth it and moving on when the moving is right. Before he hung up, Marvin got quiet again. Not the quiet of someone who has run out of things to say, but the quiet of someone who has arrived at something they want to say and is deciding how to say it. He said, "Lionel, you're a good man. Not a good musician, though you're that too. A good man, a genuinely good man. And in this business, that's rarer than it should be." He said, "I wanted you to know that I know that." Lionel said, "Marvin." Marvin said, "I love you, brother."
He said it simply, without performance, without the specific kind of emphasis that turns an expression of feeling into a statement about the expression. He said it the way people say things that they mean completely and that they want to be received completely, not as a gesture, but as a fact. "I love you, brother." 4 words. The specific 4 words that the relationship had always contained and that had not, until that moment on the phone on the night of April 1st, 1984, been said out loud in quite that way. Lionel said, "I love you too." The phone call ended. Lionel sat for a moment in the particular stillness that follows a conversation that has been unexpectedly meaningful. The stillness of someone who is not yet sure what they have received, but who knows that they have received something, who feels the weight of the conversation without yet being able to name what the weight is made of. He thought about Marvin's voice, the specific quality of it on the phone that evening, the quietness in it, the openness. He had heard Marvin's voice on records for 20 years. He had heard it in person at industry events and occasional shared moments across the geography of the music world. He had heard it on the phone, in conversations over the years. He had not heard it quite like this before, with this particular quality of someone who has set something down, who has arrived at a moment of simplicity after a long time of complication. He went to bed. He woke up on April 2nd, 1984, which was Marvin Gaye's 45th birthday. He did not know yet what the day would bring. Nobody knew yet. The day was still just a day, the ordinary beginning of an ordinary morning in Los Angeles, the city doing what it did, the sun doing what it did, the world continuing in its usual manner as it always does, right up until the moment when it does not. The news came the way the worst news always comes, without warning, without preparation, without any of the context that might make it possible to receive it in a way that does not immediately reorganize everything. Marvin Gaye had been shot. The shooting had happened in his parents' house in Crenshaw. The shooter was his father. Marvin Gaye was dead at 44 years old, one day before his birthday, on a morning in April in the city where both of them had spent so much of their professional lives. Lionel received the news with the specific quality of shock that arrives when something completely unexpected has happened to someone you spoke to the night before. The particular version of grief that includes the specific weight of the last conversation, the awareness that the last thing said between 2 people has now become the last thing that will ever be said between them, that the phone call has been sealed by what came after it into something permanent and unrepeatable. "I love you, brother." The last 4 words, said without knowing they were the last, received without knowing they were the last, and yet, somehow, exactly right, exactly what the last words should have been. Lionel Richie has talked about Marvin Gaye across the years in the way that people talk about the people they loved who are gone, with the specific combination of grief and gratitude, and the particular quality of memory that preserves not just the facts, but the feeling of the person, the specific texture of what they were like to be around and what their presence contributed to the world that contained them. He has talked about Marvin's voice. He has talked about what's going on. He has talked about what Marvin represented in the larger story of what soul music was and what it meant and what it reached for. He has not, in any public account that has been recorded, talked about the specific phone call of April 1st, 1984.
The call lives in the private category of things that are too real and too specific and too permanently weighted by what came after them to be offered as material for public consumption. The category of things you carry not because they are secret, but because they are yours, because they belong to the specific relationship from which they came and to the person who is no longer here to confirm or correct or add to what you remember of them. What's going on will last forever. Lionel had said it, and it was true, and Marvin had needed to hear it, and Lionel had given it to him, and 12 hours later, Marvin was gone, and the music was still there. The music was still playing somewhere, on a radio, on a record player, in the specific interior space where music lives when it has been received by someone who needed it. What's Going On? The album that had changed what popular music was allowed to say, still there, still lasting, the way Lionel had promised it would, the way it always would. I love you, brother. 4 words, said on the last night of a life, received by a man who said them back, carried forward by the man who received them into every year that followed, into the specific weight of every morning on which he woke up knowing that the man who had said them was no longer in the world, and that the 4 words were now all that remained of that particular moment, of that particular phone call on that particular April evening in 1984. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Share this with someone who has a call they should make, because sometimes the most important thing you can say to someone you love is the simplest thing, and sometimes the only time you have to say it is right now. Leave a comment below. What does Marvin Gaye's music mean to you? And don't forget to ring the notification bell for more stories about the moments between the music, the phone calls that happen the night before everything changes, and the 4 words that carry everything.